Hi. So my name is Christina Jensen, and I'd like to welcome you all to what is undoubtedly a once-in-a-lifetime panel here in Hong Kong. So the title of this panel discussion is Past, Present, Future, Trajectories of Graffiti and Street Art. I'm honored to be moderating this conversation, and I'm really excited to hear what you guys are going to say. So first, I want to give a big shout out to K11 for making this happen. And even though we're still waiting for Jeffrey Deitch to arrive, I think I'll just start introducing you. Let me start first with Jason, an American designer, maker, and curator based in Hong Kong. You fell in love with graffiti and street art when exploring the abandoned buildings in Detroit circa 2007 and have become a permanent fanboy, as you call it. Fast forward to today, where you are active in both developing and promoting street art and murals in Hong Kong. HK Walls grew out of a desire to make your own festival where you could focus on the artists and the artwork in the way that you think it should be done. Right now, your festival is in its 8th edition, and you guys have also expanded to include a mentoring program for young muralists, as well as exhibitions, educational, and installation work. Then we have Lauren, a key figure in the LA street art and graffiti scene with a distinctive illustrative style and imagery that has a core connection to your Asian American roots. Your fondness for fantasy, hybrid characters, and play is exemplified by paintings such as Onsen Psychedelica, which has shape-shifting figures. In addition to showing work and live painting at various international art festivals and institutions, you have created outdoor and indoor murals at the Long Beach Museum of Art and New York City's 4 World Trade Center. You also make installations, paintings, ink drawings, and sculptures. Drawings inspired from queer worlds, non-binary identities, dreams, violence, animation, cybernetic organisms, love, sex, human dignity, metaphysical wanderings. You have an activist spirit, for example, creating a mural depicting cerulean tigers, candles, and an offering to the fruit in LA's Chinatown, emblazoned with Stop Asian Hate Crimes and Protect Our Elders. Then we have Lee, Lee Quinones. Born in Puerto Rico in 1960 and raised in New York's Lower East Side, you started drawing at the age of 5 and became one of the early school practitioners of graffiti, starting on the streets and in the subway in 1974. By 76, you were creating huge murals and began painting entire subway cars. The first to do so, you would go on to paint more than 100 in the decade that followed. Alongside you were your core members of the Fabulous 5 crew, later joined by Fred Breathwaite, becoming Fab 5 Freddy. Above ground, you made graffiti history in '78 with Howard the Duck and the first whole handball court mural outside of your high school. As such, you are credited as the originator of the American street art. You have been developing your artistic practice to this day, and your work is in permanent collections, often using your art and platform to empower. For example, writing, "If the battle chooses you, choose what you battle," and Aiko. So, born in Tokyo, where you also studied filmmaking and graphic design, you took the brave step of moving to New York in '97 without speaking a word of English. You have managed to affirm your place as one of the most influential artists in street culture, as well as being the first woman to take over the iconic Houston Bowery Wall. In the early days, you assisted Takashi Murakami in his Brooklyn studio with his first solo exhibition, whilst attending the New School for an MFA, convincing professors and classmates that graffiti and street art were your mediums and that they would embody the art movement of the new millennium. And you were right. You were, alongside Banksy, on his iconic 2005 Hang and Run, illegally hanging paintings in New York's top museums. Since 2006, you have been doing gallery shows and public commissions as a solo artist, primarily using stenciling, spray paint, silkscreen, and collage, also creating your signature stencil, the bunny, which has traveled widely and recently popped up in Amsterdam at the Straat Museum. So I'm going to start with a few individual questions to you guys. Are you ready, Jason? So, you've been keeping an eye on the scene here, even before you started HK Walls. I'd like to know, is there a Hong Kong style? And could you tell us about some interesting homegrown work that's come out of Hong Kong?
I mean, there's a lot of things you can reference. Like the King of Kowloon started painting the streets of Hong Kong in the 50s or 60s, like before even the modern graffiti movement started. But he was super prolific, but just one guy, and it never became a movement. It died with him. The Hong Kong graffiti culture is really inspired by what started in New York and Philadelphia. It's part of that larger graffiti culture and movement, and takes a lot of its style from there. But the newer generations you're starting to see in the last 5 or 10 years, you're starting to see more Chinese characters rather than just like English.
When HK Walls, you did Tools of the Trade. You had a whole section which was honoring graffiti tags. And I'm very curious to understand, what is this thing about writing your name? Is it branding? Is it marking your territory? Is there a machismo around being remembered? What is this tagging phenomenon?
Well, I mean, in some ways, I'm kind of an outsider as well. I don't have a history degree, or I didn't study art. From my point of view, it is a lot about saying I exist, like a whole culture built around it, but I might let Lee kind of go a little deeper into that.
Yes, the tag is sort of an extension of someone's identity, and when you think about in a city such as New York, just that whole eastern sector, there's just so much distractions going on that I feel that it was sort of an extension of your struggles and your identity crisis. As the years went by, the tag went from one crude, seemingly immature scratching, scrawling, into this really ornamental, flowing calligraphy style that had these embellishments of stars and quotation marks and crowns and clouds. So when you think about just the name itself, you're making a statement just on that. You're crowning yourself as someone that has come to some level of achievement, right, and respect. It wasn't a machismo thing, because I think everyone felt that they were vulnerable.
Move on to Lauren. I saw that last year you created the Ancestral Crypt inside Meow Wolf's Santa Fe exhibition. And I'd really like to know more about how your background and your interrogation of what you call queer ancestry is manifested in this work.
Sure. Yeah, does everyone know what Meow Wolf is? Meow Wolf it started in Santa Fe, but it's this huge complex full of this psychedelic installation work, and they invite artists to take over a whole room and basically say, do whatever you want. And so given the direction of my work with ancestry and mixed identities and everything, I set to work trying to create a space that would talk about what it means to be mixed and queer and Asian American. When I approached the room the first time, I realized there's a step that you have to climb over to get into the room. In my grandmother's village in China, all the doorways to the temples had the same situation. Same with Menmo Temple, because ghosts can't jump. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to make a temple space. And actually used a lot of photos from Menmo Temple as inspiration, which is amazing because I'm painting right around the corner from there. Because I think when you're a mixed race person in America, or a non-binary person, or a person that has a lot of different identities, you're often caught between being like, I'm not enough of this or enough of this. And I think what I've realized in the past years is that being in between in a liminal space is a destination in itself. And so I wanted to create a space where you could physically be in that place and feel like you belong. So I had all these rotating installations and an altar space to Tu Shen, who's the Chinese god of the queers, protector of the queers. There's a lot of like contemporary feeling that queerness is still hidden and transgressive in Asian countries. So when I talk about queer ancestry or like the transcestors, about how queerness has been in our blood for so long.
I want to ask a question for both the ladies here. So what is the role of women in graffiti? Who are your mentors? And what do you think women bring to the medium?
I think it's extremely important to continue leveling the playing field and opening doors for more femme people, people who are gender fluid, non-binary people. The voices that come through when you access more people of different identities is what diversifies the bank. But there is a really important energy that comes from femme people that's absolutely necessary for someone like me to come into the scene. I've always looked up to Aiko, I've always looked up to Swoon, I've always looked up to Keratos, who's been painting here for over 10 years. There's a lot of really amazing women in the scene, and especially Asian women, and I see more of them every day.
To be honest, the question always kind of bothers me because my early stage, I have nothing great about being female and being Asian. Like, seriously, when I start my thing after move to New York, people used to call me, hey, China. Like, my everyday life when I arrived to New York was like really horrible because I didn't know anyone and anything, and I also cannot speak like this. I tried to find a place to be, and it was only one option, like graffiti was only place. For me, my art is like telling people it's okay for us to paint, it's okay for me to paint, because boys used to tell me, you help us, but you can't touch your paint. So that's why 2006, I start not working with them and just becoming alone. And the great things happened to me was I met Martha Cooper and Jeffrey. Instantly, they became like a family, you know. Jeffrey invited me every single project, like about street art and graffiti, and I got this whole great education, and at the same time, I was able to work.
Great.
So that's my story. So yeah, being female, being Asian is like, oh my God, do I have to say this again?
Yeah, we were discussing, like, I wonder whether we'll be able to stop asking that question, hopefully one day soon. In your work, you use a lot of ukiyo-e woodblock as inspiration. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about these forms and, you know, how you use them?
Do you know about Edo period in Japan, like 16th century and 17th century, we had a revolution. Ukiyo-e is invented by working class people. The art used to be for high class people, but at the time that revolution happened and working class people invented how to make cheap paper, ink, how to carve so that we can make a print, also tattooing, kabuki, that's all coming from working class. And I instantly felt, oh, that's like,
Yeah,
so
old school hip hop.
yeah, wow, my ancestors so cool. Yeah, we even started earlier, and that's why I started to discover my own route. 2018, Ukiyo-e Museum asked me to have a solo show in Japan. And I had a great opportunity to have my solo show surrounded by all ukiyo-e woodblock prints from like 17th century. And
wow.
they said I'm succeeding this whole art form to new generation. So I'm like, yes. I cut a lot of stencil by hand. It's like woodblock. And I spray paint, like transferring, like printing, you know. And I love talking about this to everyone because it's really cool. Like Japanese used to have this hip hop movement 200 years ago.
Lauren was mentioning the god of queer people also is represented as a rabbit. I was just wondering about your famous stencil. What do you have a deeper meaning with the symbol of the rabbit?
My beginning was really tough, and the bunny is also the symbol of my freedom, peace.
Okay.
Because the first bunny stencil was made at Banksy studio. I had a bee who is my cruise. They asked me, is this your bunny or cruise bunny? If it's your bunny, you can't paint that. So I was really upset. No, I'm gonna do this. So the bunny was like my stubbornness. Inside, like, I had like hundreds of middle fingers. And Banksy showed, and he said, oh, Aiko, I like your bunny. Can you hit on my bathroom door? So I got like approved. And that was the beginning of bunny. And ever since I cut thousands of bunny by hand and spray painting probably like a couple of thousand bunnies all over the world. Last month in India, I think I did like 30 of them in Mumbai. And yeah, it's like my chant, my medication.
I'd like to move on to Lee. So you guys, when you did your first big full train, how did you guys come by the idea, you and your crew, to paint the whole one?
In 1975, before I joined the Fabulous Five, I was already coming up with the idea in my head that, you know, if I can paint one whole car, why not do 10 at the same time? 10 being a whole train as it comes into the station. If you paint an entire subway car, it is maximum impact on its own. When it comes into the station, like Klaus Oldenburg said, it's like a banquet of flowers that comes out of the dark and springs open on you. When you come from the marginalized side of society. The trains are your vehicle, but they're also your savior and your platform. And at that point, it was really the Instagram of the time. Because it can go from one side of the city 30 miles up to the North Bronx and capture the imagination of many people that I would never get the chance to meet. I wanted to impact people with things that were impacting me, things of political nature. I'm on the heels of the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, the women's rights movement. I wanted to identify with the people that were marginalized, which was the writing public. I would change the complexion of the room that they're all in, because the media keeps saying these are, you know, misdirected youth that are hell-bent on destroying property. Far from the truth. The property was already destroyed by the deficit left by the political nature at that time. So when the Fab Five said, you're crazy, but we're down because they were crazy, I was like, bet, let's do it. And in November of 76, bleeding into 77, we did the first successful whole subway train.
That's 10.
Strategically, at that point, said, we are going to paint this train on the back side of the wall of the tunnel. It is going to pull out past the control tower on the other side. So their vision is, oh, here's just another train popped with smallpox of graffiti, but on the other side is the greatest feat ever done at that time. It went right into service, into the city of New York, and people applauded it on every station pretty much. Because I wrote it. I rode the train all day long.
Oh, wicked. Welcome, Jeffrey. Yay. Thank you for joining us. Finally, I'll introduce Jeffrey Deitch. So it's quite hard to sum him up because he's been working in modern and contemporary art for over 50 years as an artist, writer, curator, dealer, and advisor. Best known for his gallery, Deitch Projects, which has produced more than 250 projects since '96. There, he championed artists such as Tauba Auerbach, Barry McGee, Yoko Ono, and many, many more. Active as a critic and curator since the mid-'70s, the first important curatorial project being in 1975 titled Lives, an exhibition about artists who used their own lives as an art medium. From 2010 to 2013, he served as director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, LA, organizing major solo exhibitions of work, for example, Urs Fischer, Ouija, Kenneth Anger, and group shows including The Painting Factory Abstraction After Warhol and Art in the Streets. He has curated this exhibition, also this book, which is in support from K11 Art Foundation, which is why we're all here today. So a big thank you to Jeffrey. 40 years ago, you brought graffiti artists Futura, Dondai, and Zephyr to Hong Kong to paint the site of the future iClub. So at the time, these guys were emerging artists, and now you're back with some of the same artists who are now known as legends, as well as many, many other heavyweights of the genre. So my question is this primarily about educating the Hong Kong audience, and why here and why now?
This is the 41st anniversary of bringing Futura, Dondi, and Zephyr to Hong Kong. And it's great that we have these fabulous works of Futura here 41 years later. So when you go into the exhibition, there are these small photographs. It's the only record we have of that project of covering the walls of a parking garage with their work. All those photos were taken by Futura. Okay. So you don't see Futura in them. You see Dondi and Zephyr. but they're actually Futura's photos. You asked why now? Well, it's for the same reason I asked those artists to come to Hong Kong 41 years ago. Hong Kong is a cultural center, a financial center. It's a port city. You have a kind of transcultural situation where people from different backgrounds participate. So it's just a great place to show art, also to make art.
Absolutely.
And we have a remarkable audience. In 1982, you didn't have the same art audience, of course. Most of the people who saw the work of Futura, Dante, and Zephyr were socialites coming to parties. So there wasn't the same access. So
Which
now
is
it's
quite
great to
different at this
commemorate that and make sure that's registered in history.
In your book, you ask the question, will the popular success of street art dilute its edge, or will artists be able to use their high-profile platform to advocate personal freedom, social progress, and an expansion of consciousness to an even larger audience? So may I ask you to answer your own question?
I'm optimistic about this. I think that the integrity of the art prevails over all this. So our friend Pharrell has been now given this amazing position, is creative director for Louis Vuitton Men's. So Pharrell knows a lot of these artists personally. I expect there's going to be some very interesting artist collaboration. Some old school people might say, oh, this is terrible, artists shouldn't get involved, but for me, this is an extension of the streets. It's a very different place in the show windows of a Louis Vuitton store, very different than the side of a number 5 train, but also it gets the work out to the public, and they do it very well. So when artists participate, it has to be consistent with their vision. It has to be where the integrity of the art is above the commercial purpose. So we were talking pre-internet with Lee that the subways were the communication system. That's how artists got to know each other. And beyond that, it was person to person. Now,
Social media.
It's a different, it's social media, and was communicated. Keith Haring understood this with the pop shop. So thousands of people wearing Keith Haring t-shirts and hats, it spreads the word. So I see that as the extension of the communications platform if it's done right.
Now I want to open up, so everyone just kind of come in when you want. Graffiti is action, like a breakdance move or a skate trick or an underground concert. Its energy and its beauty exists in the moment. So the only way they can last is through documentation. What do you think about whether walls should be left long term?
It wouldn't be street art if walls were left forever. There's something that you have to embrace when you decide to paint murals about ephemerality, but it's not just losing pieces. That's also about you embracing the fact that you need to constantly be renewing yourself, re-evolving, pushing yourself, being active, getting up, being in the streets, changing, shifting, being aware of the contextual space that you're painting in. It's like the art form of the younger age because you're constantly like searching for renewal. But you know, every now and then you will get a piece that gets to stay up. Like I painted the Asian American Cultural Center at Yale, and those are the pieces that talk about the history of a place or something important, and then you get to keep that forever.
Who owns the street and who owns the work on it? Does anyone own it?
I think this is contentious now. Within a few hours of Banksy putting up a work, there's somebody with a buzzsaw trying to take it out and take out this big chunk of concrete and then sell it for $2 million.
Yeah.
And that's a travesty. So certainly the artist owns the copyright to the image, but in terms of who actually owns a work, my take is that when an artist works on the street, it's really for the public. Nobody actually owns that work. It's in the public realm.
Okay.
I'm curious, Aiko and Lee, what you think about that.
I don't own it, it's for them. As soon as I finish working, it's for them.
That's a very noble approach to it, but where the trouble comes into play, for me is that if something is documented, when you have a third party coming in and saying, yes, I would like to park this brand new car in front of it and sell that car for the purpose of giving that car some coolness or some relevance in an urban environment, then that's where the fine line gets blurry. The artist should be there to be involved in that conversation and get something from it so that everybody keeps food on the table and the lights on.
I have one more question because we want to talk about the future. So we were kind of joking about how if video killed the radio star, did the internet kill the graffiti star?
As someone who is very analog, I think a lot of muralists are, and as someone who always works freehand and who loves spray paint, I'm very apprehensive about the internet, even though I use it a lot to disperse information. I don't like NFTs. I'm like, anything that I don't quite understand myself, I think is potentially dangerous because you don't know who's running it. It's all like institutional in this scary way. So as far as I'm concerned, I want to make sure that the core of my work is always vested in the analog, spray paint. I'm on the street painting, no projectors, no grids, whatever. But I'm a little bit concerned about technology in that way. I think Instagram's cool just for dispersing information and education and mutual aid in a really beautiful way. But I don't know about the metaverse. I think as long as people are painting in the streets and robots don't take my job, I'm stoked.
One thing I can say is recently I talked to ChatGPT, and asked, like, tell me about ICO, and he knows more than I know. Like, it was amazing and so beautiful, and oh yeah, you know me so well. And I feel they know graffiti a lot nowadays, like they learn so much. I feel the future.
One day, probably there'll be new and interesting manifestations of graffiti in that domain. Just want to say thank you to you guys for being here, for your time. Thank you for your interest in street art and graffiti. And to K11, thank you very much.
Thank you.